So a couple of months ago, I came across a video by a band that I had never heard of before, a band called The Who. No, 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 not the British band from the 60s and 70s. The Who. They're Mongolian. They play traditional Mongolian instruments and they write lyrics in the Mongolian language. They use a style of singing that was first developed by ancient Mongols. They even write lyrics using historical Mongolian war chants. I liked what I heard. They've become part of my musical repertoire now, and I love how the traditional instruments work so well with the modern sound. Now, The Who write music that uses elements of their culture, a culture that once ruled a truly enormous amount of the Eastern Hemisphere. Led at first by Genghis or Genghis Khan, and later by his sons and grandsons, the Mongols created an empire that spanned from China all the way to Western Asia and even into Europe. Listening to this music reminded me of a book I read while I was still in high school in an AP World History class. It was called Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. In the book, written by Jack Weatherford, he uses this source called The Secret History of the Mongols, as well as others, to tell how Genghis Khan, whose real name was Temujin, managed to take a group known for being herders and hunters and turn them into like the most feared military force in the world at the time, and potentially ever. It's hard to know for sure. So here's the deal with Genghis Khan. Contrary to what you might expect from a world conqueror, he was born poor, like dirt poor. Unlike other tribes in Mongolia, the tribe he was born into lived by hunting small game, not herding. The wealthy tribes had herds of sheep, horses, and camels, and they used them for food. Young Temujin's tribe, they had to live off whatever they could hunt. That was usually small rodents and birds. Other tribes looked down on Temujins. They kind of thought they were scum. Even other members of Temujin's tribe thought he and his family were scum. And additionally, they actually abandoned him, his brothers and his mother. Temujin had to figure out how to survive without a tribe to support him and his family. This time had a major impact on him and the person he would become. First, he learned that you couldn't always rely on people related to you by blood. Second, he learned how to survive. As he grew older and attracted other Mongols to follow him, he adapted his survival skills into battle tactics. Weatherford, the author of this book, wrote, Genghis Khan recognized that warfare was not a sporting contest or a mere match between rivals. It was a total commitment of one people against another. Victory did not come to the one who played by the rules, it came to the one who made the rules and imposed them on his enemy. So I'm kind of skipping a bunch of stuff here, but Temujin managed to unite all of the Mongol tribes and basically created the Mongol people by doing this, right? They weren't all one group before, right? They were a bunch of separate people, and he sort of turned them into the Mongol people. And he called them the people of the felt walls because they lived in tents made out of felt, sheep's wool. So from there, he basically starts conquering everything around him. Now, it doesn't seem like it was Genghis's plan to conquer the entire world. Instead, it seems like at first he wanted to provide riches for his people by using his soldiers to steal things from the Chinese to the south of where he was. However, as he became more and more victorious, he seemed to kind of come to this conclusion that the entire world should be united under his rule. He took over northern China, he took over Central Asia, even parts of India, and everywhere he went, he spread what he called the law of Genghis Khan. This is one of the things I find so interesting about this guy, right? You see, for most of human history, authority has stayed within families. Like a king or an emperor who passes on his rule to his son, or brothers or cousins, uncles, right? Usually dudes. Genghis Khan, though, took that usual power structure and tossed it straight to the trash. For him, leaders needed to be humble, needed to show their worth before being given authority. At one point, he told his own sons, quote, "If you can't swallow your pride, you can't lead. Even the highest mountain has animals that step on it." End quote. Genghis Khan also had no time or respect for traditional social classes. In Europe, Western Asia, and most of the world, when wars were fought, the poor peasants died in huge numbers as foot soldiers. Wealthy nobles and aristocrats, who usually started the wars in the first place, were rarely killed, but instead were captured and held for ransom. Genghis Khan realized that he killed the nobles, the aristocrats, the emperors. He made it less likely that future wars would even happen. So when his army rolled up to a city, they would slaughter the rich leaders, then turn to the poor people and say, "Hey, they didn't treat you all that well, did they?" Right? So it's not so bad that they're all dead, is it? Not really. So here's the thing. We're going to treat you much better. You're going to follow our new laws, and basically life's going to get much better for you. The Mongols quickly built a reputation for this kind of thing, to the point that the aristocrats, the rich people, would sometimes just abandon their cities when they heard the Mongols were coming, giving the Mongols victory without ever having to fight. And Genghis Khan largely delivered on his promises to make life better for his new subjects. He created what might be one of the first religious freedom laws, so that Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus, and animists that they ruled wouldn't fight one another so much. They wrote the laws down and set them to music so that anyone could learn or read them through song. Best of all, though, they were willing to accept non-Mongols into their empire. They didn't hold themselves as superior to other people. Instead, they learned from people they conquered and brought them into the fold. In the words of Weatherford, quote, "The Mongols made culture portable. It was not enough to merely exchange goods, because whole systems of knowledge had to be transported in order to use many of the new products." End quote. In that same passage, Weatherford describes how this affected the world by using the example of medicine. Quote, "The Mongol court imported Persian and Arab doctors into China. They exported Chinese doctors to the Middle East. Every form of knowledge carried new possibilities for merchandising. It became apparent that the Chinese operated with superior knowledge of pharmacology and unusual forms of treatment, such as acupuncture, the insertion of needles at key points in the body, and moxibustion, the application of fire or heat to similar areas. Muslim doctors, however, possessed a much more sophisticated knowledge of surgery. But based on their dissection of executed criminals, the Chinese had a detailed knowledge of internal organs and the circulatory system. To encourage fuller exchange of medical knowledge, the Mongols created hospitals and training centers in China using doctors from India and the Middle East, as well as Chinese healers. And this sort of thing was happening in every area of knowledge, not just in medicine. And it ends up actually starting to sort of kick off the European Renaissance in some ways, because all of this knowledge that had been out in all these separate corners of the world, it all starts to get mixed together by these Mongol policies of moving people around and learning from them. Genghis Khan died before much of that could happen, and his children did have trouble following some of his ideals, especially the leaders should be humble part. Genghis Khan maintained a relatively simple lifestyle, and his sons really didn't do that. There are stories of one of his grandsons, Kublai Khan, riding around in a palace carried by elephants, which is apparently real. Like, that's not exaggeration, that happened. Their vices eventually bring the Mongol Empire down, right? Their excesses, their willingness to spend tons of money and indulge themselves brings the Mongol Empire down. Though some elements of that empire did last hundreds of years. Still, I think there's a lot to learn from the story of Genghis Khan. His life has a lot to teach us about leadership, about ambition, and about how to understand the world. Also, we get some pretty sweet music out of it. Thanks for watching. Take care.